She was born a slave. She never learnt to read or write, and yet she stood in rooms full of educated people and said things that nobody could answer. Her name, the one she chose for herself, says everything. Sojourner Truth. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you, Joshua.
You were born Isabella Baumfree, a slave in New York State. You escaped in 1826. But you didn't just escape and disappear. You turned around and fought. Why?
Because my son was taken from me. Peter. He was sold south to Alabama, which was against the law even then. And people told me there was nothing to be done, that a woman like me could not fight a man like that in court. I did not believe them. I walked into that courthouse and I told my story. And the court gave me back my son.
I want people to understand what that actually looked like. Peter was 5 years old. He was sold by your former owner for $20. $20, which in today's money would be around $685. Passed from one man to another until he ended up on a plantation in Alabama. You could not read or write, so when you filed the legal documents, you signed them with a mark on a piece of paper, and you won. The judge ordered that Peter be returned to you, and his exact words were that the boy should be delivered into the hands of his mother, having no other master, no other controller, no other conductor but his mother.
Yes, that is what he said.
When Peter came back, he had been abused. Badly.
Yes, what they did to him, to a child. I cannot describe it without my hands shaking. But he was alive, and he was with me, and no one had the legal right to take him again. That was enough. That had to be enough.
And that moment, an illiterate black woman with a mark on a piece of paper defeating a white man in court. That was before the preaching, before the conventions, before everything. That was the beginning.
That was when I understood that the law could be used. That it was not only a weapon against people like me, it could also be a shield if you were brave enough to pick it up.
You were the first black woman to win a court case against a white man in the United States.
I was a mother who wanted her child. That is all I knew. The history, other people decided that part later.
And then you became a preacher, an abolitionist, a speaker. A woman who had never read a single word, standing in front of crowds and moving them to tears. How?
I did not need to read words on a page. I had lived them. When you have been owned, when someone has looked at you and seen property instead of a person, you do not need a philosophy book to understand what dignity is. You know it from the inside, from what it feels like when it is taken, and from what it feels like when you refuse to let it go.
In 1851, you spoke at a women's rights convention in Akron, Ohio. Nobody invited you to speak. You stood up anyway. And what you said that day, people are still talking about it. Tell me about that moment.
The men in that room, the preachers, the educated men, they were saying that women were too delicate for rights, too weak, too fragile, that they needed to be helped into carriages and lifted over puddles and given the best place everywhere. And I thought, nobody ever helped me into a carriage. Nobody lifted me over any puddle. And ain't I a woman? I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I have borne children and seen most of them sold into slavery. And when I cried out with a mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? That is what I said, not because I had prepared it, because it was true. And the truth does not need preparation. It only needs someone willing to say it out loud.
That question, ain't I a woman? It cut in two directions at once. At the men who said women were too fragile, and at the white women in the movement who kept forgetting that black women existed.
Yes, I was not angry about it. I was clear about it. There is a difference. Anger clouds, clarity cuts. And what I wanted them to see was simple. You cannot fight for the dignity of some women and ignore the rest. Dignity is not a dress that fits only certain people. Either every woman is made in the image of God, or none of us are.
That brings me to the thing I most want to ask you about. Because everything you did, the courage, the clarity, the refusal to break, where did it come from? You changed your name to Sojourner Truth in 1843. You said God called you to travel and speak the truth. What happened?
I heard him. I know how that sounds to some people, but I was walking. I had left the city. I did not know where I was going, and I felt it. Not a voice like a man's voice, something deeper, a knowing that I was not finished, that what I had survived was not the end of the story, but the beginning of the work. I had been called Isabella my whole life, a name given to me by people who owned me. That day I gave myself a new name, Sojourner, because I would travel. Truth, because that is what God sent me to speak.
And the faith never wavered after everything you saw, everything that was done to you and to the people you loved.
I will tell you something. There were moments when I asked God hard questions. When I lost children, when I saw what men did to each other and called it civilization, I did not stop asking, but I never stopped believing that He heard me. And I never stopped believing that I was made by Him, not by the men who tried to own me. That is the thing they could never take. They could take my labor. They could take my children. They could not take what I knew about who made me and why.
That conviction that your dignity came from God and not from any man's permission, that seems to be the engine of everything.
It is the only engine that does not run out. Laws change. Movements rise and fall. People who promise you dignity can take it away again. But if you know, truly know, that you were made by God and made with purpose, nobody can convince you that you are less. Nobody. Because they did not make you. They have no authority over what you are.
There are women watching this right now who feel small, who have been told by someone somewhere that they are not enough, not smart enough, not strong enough, not worthy enough. What do you say to them?
I say, look at me. I was born with nothing. I was owned by men who told me I was property. I had no name of my own, no education, no money, no protection. And I stood in courtrooms and convention halls and the White House itself, and I told the truth, not because I was special, because I knew who made me. You were not made by the person who told you that you are not enough. You were not made by the culture that decided your value. You were made by God. And what God makes, He does not make by accident. He does not make without purpose. He does not make and then abandon. You are not small. You have been told a lie. And the truth is older than the lie and stronger, and it will outlast it. You already know this. Somewhere inside you, you already know.
Sojourner Truth. Born a slave, died a legend. And somewhere in between, a woman who stood up in a room full of people who doubted her and asked the only question that mattered. Ain't I a woman? The answer, it turns out, was always yes. See you tomorrow.